our new TechCU Festival Village. We have an amazing theater outdoors thanks to a couple of sponsors, Barco and Real D. And I want to welcome you all to the Festival Village. Tonight we have an amazing program for you, and I want to thank the Academy of Sciences, the Science and Technology Council. Yes, that's the Oscars. I get to thank them. Isn't that amazing? Haven't you all imagined doing that someday? So I wanted to thank the Academy for bringing this amazing program to us here at the Palo Alto International Film Festival. And Lisa Churgan is going to tell you all about the program that they have in store for you tonight. It's very special. So Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. I am the chair of Public Programs and Education for the Science and Technology Council of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our 30th anniversary screening of E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, which we are presenting under the banner of our Prime Tech series of screenings. The goal of council programming is to examine the art of filmmaking from a science and technology perspective, explaining how technical elements can augment a film story. To that end, tonight's panel will talk about the role motion picture science and technology played in shaping a benchmark in the science fiction genre, E.T. Another goal of the Science and Technology Council is education. I encourage any full-time college student in the audience tonight with an interest in cutting-edge technology for motion picture production to visit our website at www.oscars.org to learn more about the Council's internship program. And also, I just wanted to say that's what these little flyers are about. So please, anybody who's interested, try to pick one up. Okay, so now back to E.T. I just want to also say on a personal note, if you don't have a hanky, get 1, 2, 3, 4, because this is definitely a really moving film. So without further ado, let's bring up tonight's host, Variety Tech columnist David S. Cohen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a cold night. I'm going to see a fantastic movie. I'm going to get right to our panelists because you're here to see them and not me. Starting with Don Digirolamo. Don won the Academy Award for Sound for E.T., sound re-recording, and was nominated for Empire of the Sun. His other credits include The Color Purple, Flashdance, An Officer and a Gentleman, and Witness. Carol Littleton was nominated for film editing for E.T. for the Oscar. She began her career in the 1970s. Her credits include The Big Chill, Silverado, Places in the Heart, and Wyatt Earp. And Dennis Muren. Dennis Muren won the visual effects Oscar for E.T. He has many remarkable credits, too many to list, but a few include The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and Jurassic Park. He has received the Visual Effects Society's Lifetime Achievement Award, and he is the first visual effects artist to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Thank you all for being here. All right, so starting with Don, I know we have a lot of young people in the audience today, and young from my point of view could be scary old, but tell us, if you would, everybody, about the technology that you were using to do your job on this movie when you were making it. Remember, this is a 1982 release, so we're talking about 30 years ago.
Right. The technology was not digital. It was analog in those days, absolutely analog. Things that can be measured and not counted. We had the console we used had 48 faders. The entire console had 48 faders. It had another 48 returns broken down into 4 groups of 12. And so all of the music was mixed on basically 12 faders. All of the dialogue was mixed on 12 faders. And all of the sound effects were mixed on the last 24 faders. And that's the kind of thing we were talking about. The film was played back, the units of the film were played back on magnetic film, which is just like moving picture film, 35 millimeter perforated, coated with magnetic stripe, and played back forward and backward with in sync with the picture. And as a huge room of many machines moving together in sequence forward and back. And that was the story. We had no hard drives in 1982, no Pro Tools, none of that stuff. So, and no automation on the console. So when we moved to fader and we moved it in a certain way for a certain period of time, the next time we'd have to do the same thing again. So that's the story on the audio, basically.
Carol?
We had pieces of film. No digital, nothing whatsoever. No Pro Tools, no Avid, no Lightworks, no Adobe. It was all 24 frames per second. We had separate picture and separate track. And I worked with only 3 tracks: dialogue, music, and very, very minimal effects. It was, I worked on a flatbed that was called a Kim, and a moviola. If you've seen those machines, you'll know what I mean. It was all manual, mechanical, frame at a time editing. I would mark a frame with what is called a grease pencil. That would be the mark where I'd make a cut, take the piece of film out, splice it in a splicer, put it back in, take a look at it, and move on. Very, very primitive, but a lot of movies, a lot of great movies were made with mechanical equipment.
Now, Dennis, back in 1982, we were still counting visual effects shots. I'll tell you at Variety, we used to, 5 years ago, I used to publish some figures for visual effects shots. I don't even bother anymore because they number over 2,000 in a picture. Tell us about the technology you were using to create the visual effects for E.T.
Well, the technology was similar to this wonderful E.T. that Mike Bonnell made out here. If you take a look, if you guys saw it, the full-size one out there, great work. If we had it for the film, we would have used it. But what I've got here is an idea kind of what it was like when we did the show. We had no computers at that time at all to be able to make the images, so it was all done by hand. So this little slide thing, about 10 or so slides, we did it with models and cameras and films, and this is an iconic shot from the show that you'll be seeing. If we go on to the next one, you'll be seeing another iconic shot for the show. Now, some of these, the background of the moon was real background of the real moon that we photographed with a telephoto lens. This background is all fake because I wanted something that was better than we could have really ever seen in real life, so we could light it and get the colors right and get a really magical feeling that Steven wanted, almost like a dream. And the next slide, please. And the way we did these was by making model bikes, and we had 5 of them for the 5 kids that are flying. And, okay, next one, please. And these were animated 1 frame at a time. You've heard of stop-motion animation. They were animated 1 frame, 24 frames per second. This is Tom Sanamon, one of the best animators around, who also made the armatures inside the puppets. And next one, please. And this is, it's kind of hard to see, but up at the top, that funny-looking circle thing, that is the camera. And there's a giant arm that goes out, a mechanical metal arm that goes out to the right side, just to hold the camera, and the camera is shooting the bike there. Tom's animating 1 frame. It's not shooting this frame until he steps out of the way. And the way this stuff worked was, when we built the camera, there were probably 20, 30 people involved in the building of the camera that ended up weighing probably 1,000 pounds. And everything, all the mechanical stuff you see underneath there, all were made by specialists. And it took a lot of time, a lot of work to be able to do it. And now that's almost all replaced by Maya or Softimage and anything like that. It's pretty remarkable. Okay, next one. We did some shooting with the kids in front of a blue screen for when we can get away with it. We had a model like this, the real deal right there. And next, please. And then we made the BET model. This was at the time, I believe, the most expensive model that ILM had ever made because it had to light up and everything. And next frame. And inside were lights and cooling systems. It had to get power to it. It had to be bright enough that it looked like it was like really like a magical Christmas ornament, which I think is where the idea came from for it. Okay, next. And this is the background we needed to make when the ship lands, and you see it, or when the kids land on the ship. You'll see that near the end of the movie. And next, please. And we did a couple of scenes where we made E.T. Now, the actual E.T. was made by Carlo Rambaldi, but for a reason which I can't remember, ILM did make one. And it's a rubber character, the one we made. And next, please. And guess what these are? The eyes of E.T. And the next, please. And this is sort of what, you know, with a lot of talented people, you can get something like this. Again, this is not Carlo. It's not what you saw in most of the movie, but it's in the movie a tiny little bit. But Carlo Rambaldi, if he were still alive, could show you many slides like this. That's it. It's all done by hand, you know, the whole thing.
I want to talk about this guy, this E.T. guy, because if he's not convincing as a character, you have no movie. And this is something that's a puppet. And I know we had a little item in Variety today that Dennis, you had said that on the set, he didn't look that great.
Until it moved, and it was like magic. I mean, right in front of you, something like this that's just sort of static. Suddenly, when all the puppeteers are working together and Steven's directing it, you see, oh my God, this is like a real thing. And then it takes over and it stops and goes back to being this puppet.
Now, I want to talk about, we're going to bring you back and then talk about the sound of E.T. and bringing him to life with sound. But I'm also just fascinated by how you cut together that puppet performance so that we'll believably a living creature.
Well, when they were shooting E.T. go down at the set, it was just amazing because there was a din. You can't imagine the din of sound. There were 9 puppeteers off camera looking at their monitor. They were listening to Steven direct them. They could see E.T. All the facial movements had to be in sync with each other. Just think about it. Blinking an eye. If you think about blinking your eye when you move your head, everything had to seem, I hate to use the word human, but we had to humanize him. So the puppeteers were doing a beautiful job. All the handwork, Steven realized very early on that the handwork needed to be more realistic, so he used a mime artist for the hands. So we had different versions of E.T. There were the people in the suits, Pat Bylon, who was the main E.T. actor, who was actually inside one of the rubber suits from time to time. And then there was, I'm not sure how many puppets they had to work with. You would know, Dennis, on the set. And when they would shoot one roll of film at a time. That's 10 minutes. And they shot and shot and shot an individual motion again and again and again until they got it right. Go home. Phone home. Phone home. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 times until they got the arm going up and saying, phone home. Or be good. Be good. Again and again and again. So in cutting this, we would go through and make selects and put the selects together and then choose from those and make a performance of E.T. Now, normally when we're cutting a performance, it's a live person. So you have the moments when he's acting and when he's reacting. With the puppet, as Dennis said, he was acting when the actors were animating him, and then when he stopped, there was nothing. So we were constantly aware that if the puppet worked, the movie would work. If you could suspend belief long enough to realize that this was a real puppet in real time, in real 3-dimension, then you would go with it. And that was the concern that Steven and I had from the very beginning. If this film works, it'll be because E.T. works. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Don, tell us about using sound to help add life to E.T.
The mix, on the mix we did, I mean, we were supplied with fabulous voice, which was done by several characters. Several human characters spoke the words of E.T., I believe.
Yes.
And several animal characters created some of the sounds that he did as well. And Ben Burt was in charge of putting all that together and did a brilliant job. And Chuck Campbell was in charge of getting all of the physical movements and all of the little sounds that he and the other characters make, and put all the sound together. We were supplied in the mix. I mixed the music. In those days, generally speaking, there was a dialogue mixer who was the lead mixer, a music mixer, and a sound effects mixer who each did their mix together simultaneously. We had no automation. Anytime someone made a mistake, and we'd have to go back, they'd have to figure out where they were. There ended up being many, many pencil marks on the console, on the faders, to say where we were at what point. But what we did was follow the emotion of the music, raise the music when it was right to be excited, lower the music when we were finding a tender moment, E.T. in the forest, looking for home, basically, or whatever. And it was following the dynamics and creating the dynamics bit by bit as we went along. And when we got it right, we pretty much knew we got it right. And until we did, there were always questions, and so we'd go back and do more.
Carol, I want to come back to you because I thought, in addition to having a puppet to deal with, you had children.
Yes, and a dog.
And a dog.
And for Steven, this was the trifecta. Everybody knows that if you direct a film, the most difficult thing is having children and animals. And he had animals. He had a dog. He had rabbits. He had deer. He had all kinds of, and a puppet. So, in effect, it was Steven's trifecta.
So tell me about the footage that was coming into you in editing, where you were, it's hard enough to get adults to match takes, to be able to match your coverage so you can cut from one angle to another seamlessly. When you have children, what was coming in?
Well, for the most part, I would have to say that these kids were naturals, especially Henry Thomas, who played Elliot. He was undeniably Elliot at every moment. He was just a natural actor. Unbelievable. And of course, Drew Barrymore, just a little kid that she was just an amazing, she believed every moment that she was on camera. And so was Michael McNaughton. They were really terrific children actors. But like all children, they would sometimes lose their way. And you could hear Steven directing them I could hear him directing them on the track. And he was a real taskmaster with these kids. When they were on the set, they were working. When they were off the set, they could play. But when they were on the set, they were working. It was an amazing thing.
Now, Dennis, there are a few different things in this. You showed us a little bit of the spacecraft. You showed a bit of the bicycles. What was your take on how much did you work on E.T. and how much did you work with Carlo?
I didn't work with Carlo at all.
So there was sort of like a different unit over there, the puppeteers?
We were at ILM, in Marin County doing the work. And I'd fly down to L.A. when there was an effect shot that would require ILM's work in it. And a few of the shots involved Carlo's E.T. That's when I'd be there. There's one where you'll see these clay balls rise up in the air and sort of go into a solar system. That's got E.T. in it, so I'd be there for that, and a couple of other ones too.
I was talking to my boss a little while ago, and he has met several of you over the years, and he mentioned that, Carol, you had started out doing small independent films before you went to do this, and he said, "Well, ask Carol what it was like to go on to this movie," and I said, "Well, this must not have seemed like such a big movie when you were making it."
No, that's the amazing thing, is that for Steven, the big release was going to be Poltergeist. That was this film that was being made simultaneously with this one, by the way. And E.T. was the little movie, low budget, getting a group of people together who were just passionate about the project and doing it. And it surprised everybody. I suppose the level of success even surprised us. It was quite an amazing thing. We had one preview. Were you there, Dennis, in Houston? It's the most incredible preview I've ever been to. We previewed an answer print, which is never done today, and the audience, from the moment that the ball is tossed out of the shed, they were speechless. I don't want to say too much because there are a lot of kids here going to see it for the first time tonight. it's captivating. And one thing I would have to say about the fact that this is all analog, that the puppet exists in 3 dimension, in real time, in real space, and it's not a CGI invention. And I think that's the thing that makes it so utterly believable.
I'll tell you that I remember that summer of 1982 very well. And if I'm not mistaken, was that not the summer of Tron? Was it,
Might have been.
Now, which is the reason I bring up Tron is that this was the first movie to have major computer-generated visual effects in it, and it was disqualified from Oscar consideration because computers were considered cheating.
Interesting.
I'm wondering now. The one thing about sound, Don, is that unlike editing, which has gone so digital, and they're using hard drives, and visual effects, which use Maya and all this advanced software, when I talk to sound guys today, I'm still hearing about, well, I went down to the docks and I recorded this, and and we're making it's not synthesized and it's not as digital.
Most of the time you try to record the real thing, or you try to record a variety of the real things and then use the best parts of each of them. And that was certainly the case back then. Today, I think it's done even more, honestly. But if I may relate a little story, I was very new to mixing films when this project was put before us. And at times we would have I would have John Williams seated to my left, Steven seated to my right, Buzz Knutson, the dialogue mixer, to his right, and then Bob Glass was beyond that, and the 5 of us would line up on the console. And some of these scenes were just so incredible. Steven would be conducting a little louder, a little softer, all of this on my right side, and John would be over here sort of nodding or whatever, and I'd be looking at the scene, and we'd get a few new shots in the scene. But that would always be the thing that would surprise us in those days. Now, when you mix a movie, usually all of the shots are there when you're actually mixing the movie, but we'd be pre-dubbing, we'd be getting things together for quite a long period of time, and there'd be sections where we'd be looking at leader, and there wouldn't be anything. It would just be sort of this pale yellow, there's a shot coming someday kind of reminder, or hopefully, exactly. And then on successive days, we'd have more shots, we'd have more things filled in, we'd get to see more of what was actually going on. And anyway, mixing with John to my left and Steven to my right, and getting into some of these scenes, it was just remarkable because we'd all be feeling it. We'd all be experiencing it. Steven would be conducting me. I'd have tears running down the side of my face, and we were living the experience of this movie as we were making it, or at least I certainly was. And I guess my cohorts had seen it many more times than I had, but it was an incredible experience.
Dennis, how many times do you think you have seen this movie?
I haven't seen the whole film any more than maybe 3 times.
Really?
Yeah, but I know the shots very well because I've seen each shot at least 100 times
You've seen
as we were doing them.
including the live action stuff with no effects in it?
No, oh yeah, the backgrounds, but not the stuff in between. No.
Carol, is there a way to even count how many times you've seen this movie?
I have no idea how many times I've seen it, but when you're working on it, you're working on sections at a time, scenes at a time, and then you put them all together and look at it and look at it again and look at it again. And it's a constant sort of accretion of detail till you get what you like. And I have no idea, but I'm sure it's upwards of 100 to 150 times. I don't know. I have no idea. A lot.
One of the funny things in that whole progression of experience, about the mix took about a month to do, and about 6 or 8 weeks before we started the mix, Carol came in, and Buzz and I had a few tracks, and we mixed the movie in a day, a temp mix, so that it could be screened. But the really funny thing about it was there was leader showing on the screen.
That means nothing, blank
blank, pale yellow leader being projected on our screen and nothing else. And every once in a while there'd be a streamer. We'd see a grease pencil mark, which would go from side to side or whatever.
We had footages.
We had footages. We could see the footage counter going and a cue sheet. No, and we had Carol, of course, who guided us through brilliantly. But my recollection, actually, because we talked about this earlier, and her recollection was different than mine, but my recollection was after 3 reels, which was 30 minutes of, about 30 minutes of running time of the movie being mixed, without seeing a single frame of the movie, Buzz said, "Are we ever going to see any picture, Carol?" And you said, "No." And we said, "Well, let's not put the picture up." And so the very first mix of E.T. was like a radio show. We saw no visuals of any kind. That's my recollection anyway.
We had a few visuals, but every likeness of E.T. was omitted because this was very, very top secret. Richard, yeah.
It was so secret they wouldn't even let the people working on the movie see it.
Right. Well, yes. Well,
Too early.
Too early anyway.
dailies were restricted. Only people who really had to be at dailies could be there.
I want to ask briefly. We're going to get to the movie in just a minute. I promise we're going to wrap this up for the youngsters who are out there we're getting bored with this. But
Tech talk.
But what do you think that how do you think this movie would be different if it were being made today? And I'm going to say, first of all, this movie had been digitally altered in a couple of ways and the version that is being shown tonight is the original version that was shown in 1982. And when I sat down with someone at the Academy to ask which version are you showing, they answered me with one word: guns. With the guns. And you'll see the guns in the movie. And there was at some point the movie was digitally altered to turn those guns into walkie-talkies. I don't entirely. And somebody said to me, "Why?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Stephen was very, very upset from the first time that he saw the guns and realized that there were guns and children in the same scene. And that was one of the things that he wished from the time that it was shot, the time that we saw dailies. He was just stricken by the fact that there were guns in scenes with children.
So he never wanted the guns.
He never wanted them, no. And we couldn't reshoot. This was a low-budget movie. We couldn't go back once a scene was shot, a live-action scene was shot. We had to go on to the next. And so I gather, although I haven't had a conversation with Steven, but I gather that he had an opportunity to change those when they were re-releasing it. So
if it were being made today, let's start, Dennis, and come down this way. How do you think this movie would be different?
I hope it wouldn't be different at all. You know,
we can hope, but
the tendency would be to make everything bigger and grander and more expensive house that the kid lives in, and just ratchet it up to a much bigger film. But it shouldn't be. I think it's just perfect, just like it is. And I'd hate to see it. I'd hate to see a CG effects in it, because they just are not as real as the real thing.
Every film sort of exists in its own time and its own period. And I think that's one reason why remakes usually don't work very well, because there was a certain zeitgeist, a certain feeling personally, that produced this. It's a highly, Stephen might argue with me, but it's a highly autobiographical film. The themes of the film relate to him and his life when he was a child in a family of divorce. And because it represents a certain kind of life, suburban life in America at that time, it would just simply be different now. It might be better, might be worse, but it would be different.
Don?
I think in sound, there would probably be more difference today than what was done in those days. I mean, in those days, it was all analog, and there are many purists that love analog over everything. But the recordings were done, the music recordings anyway, were done with Dolby A noise reduction. That was still the way to go in those days. That was supplanted, and with all the high bit rate, big word sampling things that we have now, 24-bit, 96K or whatever, that kind of thing, I think the music would actually sound better if it were done today. The scoring was fantastic. The recording of it was fantastic. The dialogue was done very well. I can't imagine that
Can't
being
imagine it being any
changing
better, yeah.
in any way, honestly. But I think the music would sound better. There were artifacts of the machinery in terms of motion of the machinery with the pulling the film across the heads, etc., that today are gone. And in those, we could argue digital versus analog forever, but there are many ways in which all of the machine problems, at least, no longer exist. And so in that way, the music could be better. But I think most of it would not really change very much. And I can't say that making the music sound better, I mean, just technically sound better, would make it a better film either, although with any luck at all, it wouldn't hurt it even slightly.
I think we're going to let everybody watch the movie. Don, Carol, Dennis, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for coming up to Palo Alto. Thank you all for being here for the movie.
Thank you.